So, President Eisenhower did meet with the aliens in 1954, according to a top engineer for Lockheed Martin Skunkworks. This is amazing. This is a bombshell revelation. Get in here. This is Jack with Cosmic Road. I talk about UFOs and the paranormal. Please hit like, please subscribe, and hit the bell to be notified of future videos. You don't want to miss a thing. Please share this video when it drops on social media. That would be super helpful. And please comment below as I'm going through the story. This is an interview that was done with this engineer, conducted by Stephen Greer, of all people. I'm not the biggest fan of Stephen these days, but there was a point in time when I was a fan and when he was doing some really good work for the UFO community. And he was enriching the UFO community instead of trying to tear it down. So, hats off to Stephen. I hope that he does get back to that point. And is a force for good in the community instead of spreading disinfo such as there's no alien abductions and toxicity and hatred toward Lou and all that kind of stuff. But getting back to the interview, and so this guy was a Lockheed Martin Skunkworks engineer. He had some friends in high places, people that were involved in the reverse engineering alien technology, and he had some access to some really, really juicy stuff. His baby, what he worked on primarily was the SR-71 Blackbird. And he confirms that the meeting between Eisenhower and the aliens took place, he says, in California in 1954. He also goes into a lot more detail about various other things. He confirms large parts of what Bob Lazar says, as well as what Colonel Philip J. Corso said. In the segment I'm going to play, you will see that he confirms a lot of what Corso said, and then he gets into the Eisenhower stuff. More of the Bob Lazar stuff comes later in the interview, and I may share that for a future video because the segment I'm about to play is long enough as it is, and there's enough in that to go over. So let's just cut right to it. Here he is in the interview with Stephen Greer.
From what I learned over a period of years, anti-gravitational, actually using the force that is generated by naturally by the planet Earth, is to repel off of it. There was research going on with that, as maybe by consultants to the Skunkworks. We know, we can safely say that yes, there were some captured craft from 1945 or 47, was it, in Roswell, New Mexico, and yeah, they were real. And yes, we really did get some technology from them. And yes, we really did put it to work. And we can thank people in the United States Army to have the foresight to put these into industry for the benefit of the people of the world. I know this to be a fact. We put it to use. But it took us a long time to figure out what it was, and then figure out how we can use it, and then what to use it for. And are those products useful for humanity? It wasn't until actually later on in the 80s and 90s, this recent, when I founded a company called Light City Technologies. It was a technology development corporation of a secret nature. We work with data signals, avionics, computer, and as I had talked with you before, we knew each other from certain agencies of the military in contract with the CIA or other branches of usually called unseen industry. I would say that's a good term. We can term it black, deep black, or hidden. And okay, that might be okay for the popular, but having participated in it, and we still do once in a while, on contract, because we might get something useful that can save lives and save money as well for everybody, not just this country. The question that there is advanced some people call them advanced races. Well, the knowledge that I have of these technologies coming with the aircraft or the craft that were captured here. I didn't see the craft, nor did I see the bodies, but I certainly know some of the people that did. And of course they're much, they're passed on now from their earthly bodies, but there was no question that there are people or beings from outside the planet that have lived here for a long time. And it isn't just something new that's been happening in the last couple of years. There's been NATO research conducted, joint research, joint meaning many different countries, and this it's been documented as to who those races are and their population at that time. And this was back in the early 60s. This is when what precipitated the need for our aircraft was the result of these reports coming out from NATO. These reports were started in the late 50s. They were finished in the early 60s and disseminated to the appropriate leaders of various countries, I think, but they were kept under lock and key, if you will. And the prominence or the greater exposure or greater occurrence of unidentified flying objects became, the objects became more known. And they actually stopped. They would communicate. We have records from 1954 that were meetings between our own leaders of this country, as well as a meeting with the leaders of our country here in California. And as I understand it from the written documentation, that we were asked if we would allow them to be here and do research. And the statement I have read was that, well, how can we stop you? You're so advanced. And I will say by this camera and this sound that it was President Eisenhower that had this meeting. And it was on film, sort of like what we're doing now. Bringing it up to date, their NATO report gave that there were 12 races, and that the final summary, they had to have contacts to go to these races in order to understand who they are, what they're doing, and what they could do. And it didn't get into the contacts, but it certainly did verify that they haven't been here for just a few years, maybe hundreds, maybe thousands of years. And this was written in the text.
Isn't that fascinating? So we've got 12 alien races that NATO knows about and are possibly interacting with. And some of these guys have been around for thousands of years. He even uses the word population, the population of these beings, not a sole emissary, like Valiant Thor, but actual populations of these beings that have been here for a long time. He says thousands, but he might have been implying that it was much longer than that these things could have always been here. But yeah, so according to this guy, President Eisenhower met with the beings. I wish he was able to provide more details about those meetings. Which aliens did he meet with? Because there are several different versions of that story, right? There's the version where he just met with one race. There's the version that he met with 3 races and accepted deals from 2 of them and denied deals with the 3rd one. And there's different versions about which ones he accepted and which ones he didn't. The predominant one that I've heard is that he rejected the deal of the Greys. But since the deals usually seem to encompass alien abductions, technology in exchange for allowing abductions, and the Greys are the principal abductors, others do abduct people, but Greys are the principal ones, then I don't tend to believe that story unless all of that is done outside the bounds of the agreement, which is completely possible. But another version of the story goes that he rejected a deal with the more human-looking ones that were more enlightened and benevolent, and they wanted him to disarm, to get rid of his nukes. They wanted humanity to de-nuke. And Eisenhower wasn't willing to do that. And it's, easy to understand why. Nuclear weapons had just won the war with Japan and prevented a land invasion of Japan that would have cost millions of lives, most likely. So, and it was a very good deterrent against the emergent Soviet Union. But I wish we had denuked. I think that would have been great. The aliens, according to that story, were promising us more spiritual, enlightenment and more spiritual gifts, not just technology. I have seen evidence that we received technology both willingly and unwillingly, the crash retrievals. In it, there do appear to be many instances of the beings working with us, and very likely some technology exchange. But as to which version of the story is the version, if any of them are the version, who's to say? But it is really interesting that he actually saw documentation on this. He also talks in this segment about knowing people that had seen the craft and the bodies of the beings recovered at Roswell. But not just Roswell, because he has that very interesting slip of the tongue when he says 1945. Oh, wait, was it 1947? Oops. I thought that was really funny because I think that he was, hinting that we did have stuff in 1945, which of course now we know we did. There was the Trinity crash in 1945, and as well as we recovered the remains of the Mussolini UFO that people like Lou Elizondo have talked about and have vetted as a real thing. So Mussolini got this UFO in the 30s, and he had people like Marconi working on it, and some of that technology may have wound up in the Marconi company, which may or may not have anything to do with the weird murders that happened among the scientists in the Marconi company in the 90s. I'm betting it probably had something to do with it. But in any case, we got that UFO, or whatever was left of it, in 1945, which is the date. That's his slip of the tongue. So I don't know if he's referring to that specifically, or the Trinity crash, or what. But it's an interesting feature of this clip. Later in the interview, he actually talks about the beings, living beings. He says that he knows people, fellow engineers, who were involved in a certain, project or series of projects, and during a certain level of your working on this project, you get to meet the beings. They're just there. Boom. You're just working on some stuff, and then they're there doing their thing, working on it, and you work alongside them, and you're doing whatever you're doing. He didn't know exactly what that was, or at least he did not say in this interview. I would love to know what that was. What exactly are we doing with the beings? What is our involvement? That drives me crazy. I mean, we're helping them abduct people. We're working on some sort of technology with them. What are we working on? He does actually say that they are helping us fly craft similar to theirs, and that they have actually built ships, training ships that we can use on the ground to train in how to fly their ships, or their sorts of ships. So there does seem to be a technology transfer and training going on in these deep projects. And I may get to that, do a full video on that later, because there's a lot to break down in this interview, and I encourage you all to watch the complete interview. It's a really great one. So, but just to stick with what he says in this segment, we've got Eisenhower meeting with the beings. Apparently there's documentation on that he's seen, and there's also crash retrievals. There's craft that we have, and there's alien bodies that we have. He also talks about farming out the technology that we recovered from these crashes to the private sector, and he goes into more detail about that in the interview, but he does mention that in this segment. and which is corroborating the Philip J. Corso material from the book The Day After Roswell. I always love these points of corroboration because, we need them in this field. Anyway, all in all, a fascinating interview, and I may do more follow-up videos on this interview because it really is that meaty and that interesting. And again, I encourage you to go watch it in full. But let me know what you think about all this craziness in the comments below. Please please subscribe and hit the bell to be notified of future videos. And I'll catch you next time. Until then, this is Jack with Cosmic Road signing out.